Hello and welcome. My name is Rochelle Friesen, and I'm the Canada Coordinator for Christian Peacemaker Teams, and we work closely with Sabeel in Jerusalem. We currently have a human rights team on the ground in Hebron, and it is so great to be joining all of you again. Thank you for joining us for the latest Kumi Now online gathering as we learn about and challenge the assaults on Palestinians' freedom of speech and the freedom of the press, and also turn our eye to the upcoming Palestinian elections that are taking place. Before we start, I'd like to remind you that this session is being broadcast live on Facebook. So if you do not wish to appear, please turn off your video feed. That button should be sort of like at the bottom of your screen. There's a little video icon you can click on. We would also love it if you could quickly take a moment to share one of the links that are being shared in the chat so that others will be reminded to join this amazing webinar. Also, we are now inviting people from the audience to tell us how you are applying Kumi Now back in your own community or otherwise advocating for Palestine. If you have an idea or a project you'd like to share for up to about 5 minutes in a future meeting, please email us at kumi@kuminow.com. And that link, I think, will also be dropped in the chat. Now it's time for our weekly activism survey. Mark, could you launch the poll? And please note there are 3 questions. So be sure to scroll all the way to the bottom. The first question, what action did you take related to last week's topic on nation state law? There are multiple answers there. The second question, there were only 408 violations against journalists and media freedoms in the West Bank, only, including occupied Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, recorded in 2020, which is actually a drop, believe it or not. And so what explains that drop? And the third question, where do Palestine and Israel rank on the World Press Freedom Index out of 180? So just take a moment to answer those questions. It's great to see some of the responses coming through. So it's great to see how many people took action last week to learn about the nation state. 46% decided to learn more. But those numbers are jumping around as more people answer, which is great. It's still the largest response. Next is shared this information on social media, which is great. That also provides people with another way to learn. And then, and some posted, so there was lots of chances to post on social media. So we move to the second question. There were only 408 violations against journalists in the West Bank, occupied Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip. And we have a very, very bright audience because you are correct. 70% said the COVID pandemic. So it wasn't like somehow the occupation got more friendly. It was the COVID pandemic that actually led to less violations. And the third question, where do Palestine and Israel rank on the World Press Freedom Index? And out of 180, Israel ranked 13, I believe. And Palestine ranked 36. So thanks for taking part in that poll. While neither ranking is one to be proud about, Israel as a whole does have a freer press than Palestine. However, the ranking doesn't fully reflect the discrepancy between how Palestinian and non-Palestinian journalists are treated in Israel, and how Israel is also responsible for the repression of media within Palestine. And I mean, there's lots of stories of journalists being shot, Palestinian journalists being shot by the Israeli military. We hope that you will find this session interesting and informative. I'd like to start by having everyone you'll be seeing today introduce themselves. So Omar, if you can briefly introduce yourself, and then Donna and Katie can introduce themselves.
Yes, greetings from Jerusalem, from Sabil. My name is Omar Harami, and I will be giving you an introduction for today and a news update from the ground.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Donna Baranski Walker. I'm the executive director and founder of Rebuilding Alliance, a U.S. nonprofit, and I'm calling you from San Francisco area.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. My name is Katie. I'm the advocacy coordinator at Rebuilding Alliance, and I'm calling in from the state of Maryland.
Thank you. I have an apology to make. I shared wrong information and I'm going to correct it because we all know folks would love it if they could say, Sabil's handing out wrong information. So the correct answer to the last question is that Israel ranked 86 and Palestine ranked 132. That is the correct information. I apologize. Nobody attack Sabil and Kumi now for my error. That was my error. So thank you, Omar. I know you're going to give us an update on what's going on and a little bit on freedom of press and freedom of speech in Palestine. So I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. There has been many things happening from Palestine, Israel this week. First of all, for most Christians in the Holy Land, or Christians who follow the Julian calendar, last Sunday was Easter Sunday. So it was much celebrated throughout the country, especially in Jerusalem. There were many frictions between Palestinian Christians and the police, the Israeli police. They were restricting Palestinian Christians to go to the church, and and a number of people were also arrested. I mean, this has been also a special year for Jerusalem because it was the first time to our memory that it is only the Christian community of Jerusalem was in the church. So one part made it very sad and lonely, Jerusalem, but it was also a nice feeling because most of the Christians of Jerusalem do not get a chance to have access to the church during Holy Fire or Holy Week of the Church of the Resurrection because it's the space is limited. This week also there was a very sad disaster that happened. There was a group of 100,000, close to 100,000 Jews celebrating, Orthodox Jews mainly, celebrating a religious holiday. And a stampede occurred and over 45 people lost their life. Many of them were children and over 155 people were seriously injured. So this was the biggest civil disaster in Israel's history. So it is something that has left everybody in shock and saddened. And Palestinian elections, also another correction to Rachel, or maybe to the text, it has been postponed. The main reason is that although Israel did not respond whether it will approve of Palestinians holding the elections in East Jerusalem, so this caused a problem, an internal decision in Palestine to cancel the decision without consensus, but this was a decision made by the leadership. We're hoping that it will not be another 15 years until the next elections take place. Today by midnight, Netanyahu has the deadline to start to form his own government, which seems as an impossible mission. So most likely we will go into a fifth election in Israel in the coming period. Sheikh Jarrah, which is making the news around the world. There has been, there's 550 people under the threat of eviction from Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. The High Court has ordered that half of the families, or a small chunk, or percentage of the families that they have to evict their homes by the 6th of May. The other group will be on the 1st of August. People continue on a daily basis. In the evening, Palestinians gather in Sheikh Jarrah who are trying to put an end or to create pressure on Israel to cancel this such unjust decision. There was also a sad story in Gaza. Rawa Abu Murshid, who's a Palestinian female journalist from Gaza, she was attacked by Hamas individual or member of the security forces for not wearing the hijab. It's not related to the freedom of speech, but their problem was that she was not wearing the hijab, especially during the month of Ramadan. He called her names. She responded and defended herself, and then she was brutally attacked. This does not happen very often in the Palestinian territories, but this was shocking news, and there has been plenty of condemnation from Palestinian journalists and the civil society and many members of the community. Freedom of speech. We all, I believe, everybody who's on this meeting, we all support freedom of speech. It's a human right, just to say the least. However, while we all defend, or many people around the world defend the freedom of speech, especially in the free world or the developed world, when it comes with Palestine, immediately, regardless of how controversial people speak about specific topics, religion, economics, on any topic, freedom of speech is defended. But when it comes to Palestine, immediately people get attacked. There are many people who have started to discuss this, studying this case. Why is Palestine an exception? Why is but Palestine? Why is everybody allowed to speak about anything, but when it comes to Palestine, it seems to be a taboo? And the first reason is that usually we hear, and especially people get attacked, especially when even Christians speak, it is labeled as anti-Semitism. So immediately when somebody speaks on Palestine, they are labeled as anti-Semitic, and immediately they are immediately silenced within even their own community. And very few people would be courageous enough to defend such people, although they know that most of these accusations are not anti-Semitic. Now, of course, we understand that some people might say things that are anti-Semitic, unfortunately, or seem to be anti-Semitic, but this is not the general voices around Palestinians or people who defend Palestine. But not only when it comes to Palestine as being called anti-Semitic, it's hate speech. Hate speech, even if people are very articulate and they base their arguments on human rights and international law, and reports made whether by Israeli or Palestinian or international respected organizations, immediately this is labeled as hate speech, and people immediately are silenced. So we all face this, especially this group who is on the talk. You are one of the most active individuals within your communities and your churches when it comes to Palestine. Then when we go to social media created a platform for Palestinians who do not have access to mainstream media to have an alternative. Continuously, year after year, we're feeling more and more restrictions coming out from Facebook, canceling Facebook pages, limiting how many people can join a Facebook page, banning groups, and so on. And that's one case scenario, especially if the Facebook groups or the accounts are very active and have many followers. Another side is that Facebook is also used by a weapon. Almost last year in Jerusalem alone, over 1,000 Palestinians were arrested. Not all have been sentenced, mainly teenagers accused just for what they have posted on Facebook. Almost every family has somebody who has been arrested in Shafat refugee camp in East Jerusalem because of hate speech or incisive speech on Facebook. It could be a song, it could be a poem, it could be a cartoon, it could be a picture, and so on. So that's a major problem for us Palestinians. Twitter, Instagram, there is huge censorship when it comes to Palestine. Not only to Palestine, but specifically when it comes to Palestine, even at Sabil, there is an office for Facebook in Tel Aviv that usually even comments on what we as Sabil post on our Facebook page, limiting our outreach. Now, Palestinian journalist, Israel is seen as a free democratic state within Western standards. And that's true. If you're an Israeli journalist inside Israel, you're extremely protected. You have all your rights. However, then it really depends and your conditions and your situation changes with what nationality you hold. So if you're an Israeli Arab, a journalist, you have less rights. If you're a journalist from East Jerusalem, you have even less rights. If you are from the West Bank or less rights, and even if you are from Gaza, you have zero rights. So Palestinian journalists continuously are arrested, killed, injured, abused, threatened, whenever they become effective. In last week's demonstrations in Jerusalem, 7 journalists were beaten up during the demonstrations, although they were wearing a press vest. Now, when it comes to Palestine, with the freedom of speech, since 2007, we've had the Palestinian divisions between Fatah and Hamas. Fatah controls the West Bank, Hamas controls the Gaza Strip. So basically, if you are in the West Bank and you critique Fatah, and most likely you have an alliance or you are one of the supporters of Hamas, immediately you are arrested and silenced and threatened. The same goes in Gaza. If you are seen as a supporter of Fatah and you critique any Hamas official or policies of in Gaza, you are arrested and basically you have very little human rights. However, if it's you're somebody who's not from Fatah or Hamas and you critique the PA or you critique Hamas, there's less restrictions on you. However, no one can claim that there is freedom of speech when it comes to Palestine and Israel. It is something that we used to be very proud as Palestinians until the mid-1990s. We were very proud. Everybody could say whatever they want. There was no restrictions. On a yearly basis, and I think a part of the occupation within our own society, this has continued to deteriorate. We blame the divisions, we blame the tensions between the major two factions. However, we'll have to see if the elections, when they occur, if they will be able to solve it. This is a very brief introduction to the topic because when we had a meeting with Donna, Rebuilding Alliance and the Kumi team, we thought of doing it in a different approach. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening.
Thank you so much, Omar, for all that information. We now turn to our main issue of the week and our very special guests. As they speak, if you have a question, please type it in the chat, and I will try and ask as many of them as possible when we get to the Q&A as time allows. So Donna and Katie, welcome and take it away.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much to Sabil, to everyone on the line, many familiar faces. I also just want to thank people of Jerusalem, and that means Jerusalem Palestinians and Jerusalem Israelis, both of whom are working very hard in human rights groups, sometimes across boundaries, to find a way to keep all the neighbors there, to keep Palestinian Jerusalemites in their homes. I want to especially thank the families of Sheikh Jarrah who have asked our Building Alliance to help reach out to Congress. And that's what I want to bring forward to you in my presentation with Katie's help. And also I want to thank Rebuilding Alliance's team, our staff, our volunteers who've really constantly work hard to make this type of Contact Congress appeal work. So let me share screen and show you what it is that we're focusing on. Hold on for a second. I'll bring you to our presentation. Sorry about that. And here. Oops. And we'll start. Thanks for your patience. So what's the core issue? It's not that the court has ruled against the families. It's that on May 6th, the Israeli Supreme Court judge who has been holding preliminary hearings in the Sheikh Jarrah appeal is unlikely to bring the case to the full court. So what are these preliminary hearings? It's an attempt by the judge, a legitimate attempt to find common ground between the families and those who are claiming their land and their houses, to find some sort of resolution between themselves. And this can work. It has worked in other cases. It doesn't look anywhere likely in this case. Will the court take the appeal? That's the core issue, and chances are they will not. It doesn't look very good because the preliminary hearings, according to the lawyers for the case, are not going well, as one might imagine. And so we'll have a bit of time, not very much, but, oh, sorry. Let me get this to move forward. And it doesn't want, good. So the key question, and this is the question to ask to your elected officials, what will the state of Israel do to prevent the evictions of the Palestinian families from their homes? What I want to urge you to do is to ask your elected officials to do two things. Call the Israeli embassy on your behalf, and also call your State Department, Foreign Ministry, wherever you are in the world, on your behalf, to ask exactly that question, and to do it now before Thursday. We're going to help you with that if you're in the US. And we've put forward a template for your email. We'll explain more about it in just a minute. Let's see if I can move this over. Your calls, so I'm going to focus on the American side. I do want to mention that we've been helping British groups pull this form of action over to Great Britain. We'd be delighted to work with other groups, and it involves really bringing an intern on to bring your parliamentarians, your elected officials into this tools. Action Network is what we've been using. I'll focus on Congress though. Your calls to Congress are the key to preventing eviction of the Sheikh Jarrah families. I'd like to explain why. I did, and many thanks to Sibyl Director Omar. We've been talking since Amira Haas's article last week about what would it take, 2 weeks ago, what would it take for Jerusalem to host its own elections? So together we've been exploring all the different possibilities. Could you host it at churches and mosques? Could you host elections inside consulates? Could you do it in people's homes like they used to do in California? In the end, I want to say that I'm really impressed with the Election Commission's strategy. Dr. Hannah Nasser came up with a really solid plan. It was going to be indelible ink, letting anyone in Jerusalem vote with their Jerusalem ID, and then, painting their finger with indelible ink so you could tell that they voted. It works all around the world. It would have worked in Jerusalem. We look forward to it being implemented when these postponed elections are rescheduled. And why is it important? Oh man, Jerusalem Palestinians deserve their voice. They deserve that voice in municipal elections in Jerusalem. They deserve their voice in Palestinian elections. They deserve their voice everywhere their voice is needed. They deserve their representation. If only they could have fair representation, maybe we wouldn't have to be pursuing these efforts in the court. So, agenda. Who's Rebuilding Alliance anyway? What is this Contact Congress advocacy? A bit more about, I was going to talk more about election, we'll push that over, and speak directly about the problem that Sheikh Jarrah families are facing, a bit of the description in a historical context, and then we'll go to your questions. So Rebuilding Alliance, we're dedicated to advancing equal rights for Palestinians. We're a 501c3 organization in the US, founded in 2003, and you can learn more about us on our website or contact us by email. What is this Contact Congress stuff that I'm talking about? It really starts here. It starts with a commitment by every senator and congressperson on their website. So here are Republican and Democrat and their websites. If you need to discuss an issue, get help with a federal agency, or need a request, then you can call their office. You use their contact page. And here, my office will do everything possible to help you resolve ongoing issues with a federal agency. It's an urgent issue with a federal agency that gets you in the door to speak to and get special assistance from your members of Congress. I'm not talking about legislation. I'm simply talking about an urgent issue with a federal agency. So Sheikh Jarrah is an urgent issue. The federal agency in the US is the US State Department. And then we go a little further and we ask that congressional office, we ask you to ask your congressional office to contact the Israeli embassy on your behalf as their constituent. And in this case, we ask you to do it now. We'll still ask next week, but this week is especially important given that the court hangs in the balance in its decision. So what's going on in this question of Sheikh Jarrah and the families under threat of eviction? Right now, 4 houses, 4 families, 4 multi-generational families right here are facing this preliminary hearing. Their appeal is before the Israeli the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is weighing the decision whether or not to take their case. It has not made that decision. In weighing the decision, it is asked to negotiate, asked both parties to come to their own solution. And I'm happy to explain why other cases actually have been positive when that type of appeal or request is made by the court. So East Jerusalem, the challenges that they're facing, evictions and demolitions are significant. In 2020, 379 Palestinians lost their homes to evictions or demolitions in East Jerusalem. It was a 16% increase from the previous year. Right now, we think 270 families are at risk, is our estimate if we count up all the various cases. These are multi-generational families, so that's a small estimate of the total number affected. Children are involved, of course, because they're part of families. And we're seeing an escalation, a turning point. And I would expect that things get worse at this moment before they start getting better. We see some hope, a glimmer of hope with the American administration. And that's why I would suggest that, or hypothesize that it gets harder before it gets better. But I hope it will turn the corner, and it does so because of your calls, frankly. Discriminatory laws are part of the problem. Before I talk about that, I'd like to present why I'm optimistic about calling Congress. Rebuilding Alliance built this kindergarten in Al Aqaba village back in 2004, and as we were building, the entire village came under demolition orders. All the homes except for 2 the mosque, the medical clinic, and our kindergarten. It would take 4 years before it reached the High Court. And then, just as that was happening, we reached out to Congress to ask their help to keep the kindergarten and the village standing. It was a Rotarian who taught me to walk the halls of Congress. We did so with people of many faiths. A special shout out to Laurie, who made this happen, and to Maris Richard, who started calling Congress. From it, we learned something really important. The court would decide in favor of the village. Now, when you go there, and I take members of Congress to visit, members of Congress staff, let me clarify, you've got to see it because the kindergarten is standing and the village is issuing its own building permits. It's in Area C. None of the homes that have been built or are under construction have received demolition orders. What we did there has worked really well. And so we continue. We learned more about how to extend this question. In this case, we asked children to make pinwheels for peace, and we brought them to speak to Congress. Here, Isar is speaking to Senator Feinstein. She would write 6 letters to the Prime Minister of Israel, 4 of which she's published, to keep Susia and eventually Han al-Ahmar standing. I think it makes a huge difference. Those villages are standing now, and of course, international efforts of all sorts keep that being true. It hasn't ended. It's not like they're clear, or that the court or the Israeli army has decided in some definitive way to keep the villages standing. But having her letters in place and her offices and the senators' continued vigilance on these questions makes all the difference in the world. So what are the laws that then affect Jerusalem? In the cases of the Sheikh Jarrah families, the legal and administrative matters law is the key, is the thing, the discriminatory law that is impacting them. This is the law that said previous owners prior to 48 could retake control, could retake ownership, could retake title of the land that they had once owned. Except the law only applies to Jews reclaiming their properties. Palestinians cannot. They cannot, of course, return to their properties. They cannot reclaim their properties. Discriminatory law. In the case of the Sheikh Jarrah families, it's asserted that a group of previous owners held that land, but that's very much in dispute. Those owners then sold their control, their holdings, to an American real estate company, and that American real estate company is bringing forward the cases in court. Another law, and it's one that we've deeply involved, we deeply explored on the behalf of the Sumerine family, where we saw some really great results so far. Not finished yet, but it's moving forward in a remarkable way. The absentee property law. It said that if you, the owner, the Palestinian owner, would be absent from the property, although the law is written broadly, it really is only about Palestinian owners. If you take refuge in an enemy country, you are an absentee person, and your properties are then taken by the government of Israel. In the case of the Sumerine family, they were never absent. And a commission explored the misuse of this law and agreed that it was grossly misused. However, it did not retroactively apply to the families impacted by it. And this, Katie, jump in here. Can you explain our action as Rebuilding Alliance through the work of constituents and what happened?
Sure. So last summer, once we got involved with the case of the Sumerine family, we joined together with the Sumerine Coalition and put together a Contact Congress campaign, which resulted in 36 briefings. So these were briefings on both sides of the aisle, House and Senate offices. And of course, those briefings happened because constituents made their calls. And so eventually, Congresswoman Jackie Spear said that she would lead a letter to the Prime Minister of Israel on behalf of the Sumerian family, asking him to prevent the eviction of the Sumerians. And so Congresswoman Spear led 25 members of Congress in this letter. Did it have an effect on delaying the eviction of the Sumerians? We don't know. But of course, this is a really positive outcome. And we hope that we can have a similar outcome, a similar Dear Colleague letter coming out of Congress on behalf of Sheikh Jarrah families. But again, this is the key here is constituents. That is why these letters come about.
So in this case, we were part of the Sumerian coalition, mostly Jewish Israeli groups and American Jewish groups around the world also. We're not religious, but we were invited to participate in the coalition to bring the message to Congress. Others in the coalition focused and continue to focus on the Jewish National Fund and who owns the title in this discriminatory process. And it was remarkable, like a BBC expose came out with a secret letter between the Jewish National Fund and the settler group next door, Elad, that described how the settler group was paying for the court cases. In this one, the Israeli Supreme Court did take the case. They delayed the case until April 5th. And on April 5th, they chose not to hear the arguments, but instead, they did something rather remarkable, something we hope is a precedent. They asked the Israeli Attorney General to weigh in on behalf of the government of Israel. What that means is that no longer is it a simple eviction case. It becomes a national policy issue, and it's very much something where Congress can weigh in and must weigh in to express concern. So we're hoping that's going to be the path on Thursday. If the Israeli Supreme Court again will agree to hear the case of the Sheikh Jarrah families. So what's going on with these Sheikh Jarrah families? The refugees were resettled in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in 1956. This is at the request of the Jordanian government. It was with UNRWA's help. There are title documents, there were agreements that were signed, but almost title issued to the families and then delayed, and then it kind of wasn't. So final agreements, final title documents were not issued. But the families have lived there all this time. Who does the land belong to? Lawyers for the Jewish families who said that they were previous owners provided a document that is questionable. The attorney for the family currently personally went to research the Ottoman land documents in Turkey, along with some of the families. They can't find any mention of the alleged Jewish previous owners. They're not listed in the Tabo type title documents. However, the Jerusalem court ruled that the statute of limitations had run out. And that's curious, statute of limitations on 100-year-old documents, and refused to consider the evidence. One's hope is that at the Supreme Court level, that evidence can be brought forward. And if not there, then you, the court of public opinion, will certainly need to look at these documents. The families are threatened with eviction by Nahalat Shamon. It's the name of the real estate corporation registered in Delaware. It's also the historical name of the area that had been populated by Jewish residents, and clearly so. They're marked in the historical documents. You'll see that 72 Jewish people did live there. Did they own? Did they rent? These are all part of that nuanced argument that really does need to come forward. So what's going on now? On February 2nd was the first preliminary hearing to encourage both sides to find a solution. This is the Supreme Court holding preliminary hearings, one judge, from what I understand. On the 2nd, which was Sunday, they were pressing for an agreement between both sides in which the Jerusalem Palestinians would accept the claim and pay back the rent, pay their back rent, which of course they've never done because they'd never accepted the claim. And then on the 6th, Thursday, that's another preliminary hearing, but likely the decision as to whether the court will indeed hear the full case or whether they will deny and simply rely on the decision of the lower courts, which ruled against the families. Eviction would be likely then right after the Eid. What are the best case scenarios? Oh, the settlers would step back from the properties, certainly, but unlikely. So our immediate goal would be for the Supreme Court to take the case, hear the arguments, hear both sides, bring it forward, and we hope require the Attorney General to weigh in, thus change the case from an eviction case into a policy case. Why a policy case? Because it affects all of Jerusalem and it affects the stability of Israel and Palestine, the world, and all of our aspirations for peace. Congressional interests might have turned the corner on this. And if so, it'll be because constituents ask. Why did it happen in the Sumarine family case? Because of this congressional interest. And it could have also been because the American election season was right in the middle of that whole discussion. So maybe, Katie, you can jump in now and describe this process of what it takes to call Congress.
Sure. So as Donna mentioned earlier, we're speaking about Congress, but we're happy to help anyone else with their own elected officials and getting a campaign going, how to write a letter, all of the above. But as far as Congress goes, writing to your members of Congress as soon as possible is incredibly important. And we've provided a pre-written letter that you can send. So that you see the link there, but I think in the next few minutes, we'll be sharing that link again in the chat. So send that letter. Everything has been set up for you. It's very easy. You're welcome to make your own changes and add in your own thoughts. Remember that offices want to know why you care about this problem, why you want them to take action. And once you've sent your letter, go ahead and ask them to schedule a meeting with Rebuilding Alliance. We've been holding briefings to talk to different staff from offices. We have Republican and Democrat offices scheduled for briefings. So go ahead and invite them so that we can connect staffers with the experts on the ground, including members of the families. And then go ahead and make a phone call. Staffers are checking their voicemails, so do be sure to leave messages. And here's the script. It's very short, it's very easy. Start with your name and where you live, and then tell them, I'm a constituent. As your constituent, I need your help stopping the eviction of Palestinian refugee families in Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem, an effort spearheaded by an American real estate company that seeks to establish a Jewish-only settlement. The Palestinian Jerusalem families have been fighting eviction since 1972. Then you'll move on to tell them about the most immediate threat. So on May 6th, the Israeli Supreme Court judge holding preliminary hearings in the Sheikh Jarrah appeal is unlikely to bring this case to the full court, which means that evictions against 4 multi-generational Palestinian families could take place as soon as May 18th. This is the time for congressional offices to weigh in. Then tell them, on my behalf, please call the US State Department or your local Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Israeli Embassy now to ask the following question. What will the state of Israel do to prevent the evictions of the Palestinian families from their homes? And then the briefing request. So next, schedule a briefing with the nonprofit Rebuilding Alliance to hear an Israeli or Palestinian lawyer, human rights expert, and or a member of one of the families facing eviction in Sheikh Jarrah. Just a side note, by the way, we will invite you to these briefings again because your voice is incredibly important. You are the reason that these briefings happen. So finally, tell them that, ask them in your calls to the Israeli Embassy and US State Department, please express my concern that evictions in Sheikh Jarrah will undermine the stability of Jerusalem while recognition of these families' rights to their homes will promote coexistence and peace. This isn't just about Sheikh Jarrah, it's about the 270 Palestinian families facing imminent eviction across East Jerusalem as enabled by discriminatory Israeli laws. And that's it.
Thank you. So if the court refuses to hear the case on May 6th, those evictions could take place as soon as the 18th. There's still time, of course, to press Congress, your elected officials. Why elected officials? It's the friends don't let friends drive drunk strategy. That because of their special relationship with the government of Israel, they're an ideal place to express their concern. And they'll do that because you ask as their constituent. We don't mind if they do it privately, publicly, any which way is fine. And it turns out it's your ask that matters. So we see these calls coming from Republicans as well as Democrats. So far, you're seeing much more of a public presence from the Democrats, but all members of Congress do offer to represent you, their constituent. So please do ask them to make those 2 calls on your behalf. Thank you so much again, and we all both look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Katie and Donna. And for folks that are outside of the US, later on in this webinar, there will be opportunities for you to act too, so we can act collectively. So now it's time for some questions. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to get to them. One of the questions is, you mentioned working with British groups. Can you say which groups you are involved in working with?
Oh, yes. We did a campaign about the olive harvest, guaranteeing access to the olive harvest. And we did that really inspired by Friends of Madama and Bareen. And at the same time, through the summer, we brought on an intern to help us add all members of parliament into the Action Network system so that constituents in Britain could write to their parliamentarians, and Friends of Madama and Bareen took on the task then, or the opportunity of following those letters and following up with the parliamentarians. It's a little different in Britain. Parliamentary system, of course, isn't as direct as in the US. However, it's a great start, and the tools are there. And Friends of Madama and Bareen are a great group to work with. They were often experts on our calls because they know, on our calls to Congress, because they know Madama and Bareen so well. It was a remarkable undertaking. We're very proud of the effort that's begun in partnership with them.
Thank you. There aren't that many questions coming through. I'm going to ask a question. So lots of folks on this webinar have been involved in doing Palestine solidarity for decades. And we have seen many, many times the Israeli Supreme Court or the Israeli court not uphold justice, but uphold a system of apartheid. And you're telling us, like, you know, we should keep pressuring the court. And my response is yes, but I'm wondering what sort of motivational points can you give us of why we should keep doing this work when some of us have been disappointed so many times?
I hear you. I'm not saying that it's a just court. I'm not saying that. I mean, our courts are also, moved far to the right by the judges that have been appointed. We certainly see judges on the High Court, and that overlaps with the Supreme Court, where they themselves are settlers. They should be stepping aside from the cases in which they have a conflict of interest. This is the Israeli Supreme Court, and that has not happened. I'm saying that something important occurs when Congress makes a call to the Israeli government. When they make that call to the Israeli embassy, their call goes all the way up to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and probably higher than that. I know for a fact, as we do the West Bank advocacy to keep a school standing, for example, once those members of Congress, usually staff, start making those calls, some will actually begin to make the calls themselves to Kogat, to the Israeli army. It begins the chain of engagement. It's something like shining a light on an impossible issue. If we all say that nothing the court does will ever make a difference, the court has no reason to know that it's under any scrutiny at all. If we all shine a light on that court, pay attention in great detail, make sure that their unjust and hopefully just opinion comes forward, we have half a chance. And as Rebuilding Alliance's experience, we actually sometimes get it to work. Will it work this time? It's only 2 days, or before Thursday. It's probably not going to work, but your engine, your call to your congressional office can maybe take a next step. It's not the court that will evict them. It really becomes who stands with them at that moment. Like, what will the government do? And that's the chain that we're pushing forward, and we're using the rule of law to make that ask. It'll change after Thursday. We'll adjust the petition. You're encouraged to send it again. Depending on what the court says, we'll be able to define some next steps. Certainly hope that the court takes the case, and that this form of engagement that we're beginning to see becomes even more of a precedent. That offers hope because it gives more chance for Congress to engage. So I'm asking you to take that. Oh man, it's not really a leap of faith. It's a way to shine a light on something that just is horrible, and in so doing, put everyone on notice that it is under scrutiny. I want to say one more thing about this. The Biden administration is using all the right words about justice, about access to justice, about the long road ahead to see safety and for American communities and for the world as a whole, that our administration is pursuing a policy of human rights. Well, those are the words we need here too. Just this morning, or was it yesterday, the British consul did a remarkable video from Sheikh Jarrah explaining the case in his own words after having visited there in person. It's public and on his Twitter page. Can you imagine the American embassy putting forward something like that? I can imagine that, and I want to see that happen. And I think that our calls to Congress can give the administration the wings it needs to move forward. So.
Thank you, Donna, for those very important reminders. Now the questions are flooding in. So a question from Samia Khoury. She says, the questions that my friends continue to ask is, if the prior Jewish residents are entitled to take their homes that they left in 1948, why can't the Palestinians in Jerusalem demand their homes in West Jerusalem, such as Lifta? What is why
really
is there
important?
Yeah,
and
go
you're
ahead.
seeing that argument brought forward by the attorneys in case after case, frankly, that this is discriminatory law, that it can't make sense, that this needs to be considered, and it needs to be spoken about openly. People deserve the right to go home. And how will that happen? This case won't decide that yet, but it will bring that argument forward.
Thank you. So another question coming in, due to the involvement of the US real estate company, it seems very appropriate to take action in the US. Are you aware of the involvement of non-US companies who are involved in evictions?
Involvement of non-US companies? So are we involved in some way of taking action in the US? We're asking those questions. You're on the right track. I agree. And then how do you do that? And is this the time? And maybe it is. It's a Delaware company. guess where the president's from. So, but will that be enough? What does it take to bring a court case? Is there any American precedent? Others will know this better than I am. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an engineer. So I look at the how of things, and we'll need good lawyers to pursue that approach. There are some really fantastic lawyers in this whole network, both in Palestine, in Jerusalem, in Israel, and in the US. And it really is a question of, is what US law prohibits US companies from going against human rights, international human rights law. So important questions.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Folks are just wondering if you're aware of any like global actions taking place in solidarity, whether in Europe or across Turtle Island or North America.
There's an important petition that's been raised by the families. Katie, if you might find it, that would be important to raise. And there's follow on Twitter, Save Sheikh Jarrah. And I'm not. I'm that's my reference so far. Like there will be more actions. Depends on what the court does. Like what will Thursday bring? Will it bring a delay? Often delays are another part of this process. And as if we have to get closer to an eviction, what actions will we all take to press our respective governments to speak out against this, to keep it from happening? I have to say that this isn't the first time it's come before the American administration, and there is some good precedent with Secretary of State Clinton way back when did some very important work regarding Sheikh Jarrah and the East Jerusalem residences. So we're hoping that some of that effort can be replicated, that some of that can be what this current administration will rely on. And we'll keep posting as we learn more about international actions.
Thank you so much, Donna. And thank you everyone for the questions and such great responses. Unfortunately, we don't have time to answer all the questions, but so we're going to move into our time of action and advocacy. And Donna, I know you said in your presentation that you think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I know that's something I've been saying as well for 10 years, but I start to wonder how much worse is it going to have to get before it gets better. So we need to do advocacy. We need to make a change. We are working on changing our approach to advocacy in these sessions. We have found that everyone is excited to act upon leaving, but sometimes it's difficult for us to follow through. It happens, I get it. So starting today, we'd like to give everyone an opportunity to get started on advocacy for the week in this session. So today we'll have a couple options for you. Omar, do you want to share a bit more?
Yes, as you have said, since last session, we've just been dedicating few minutes every week just to send an email. Last week, I got phone calls and emails from different organizations, Israeli organizations, journalists who really were very much appreciated the initiative that we've did. They said it was really wonderful and encouraging to receive some emails. It made a very big difference for them. Some of them really said we're working on, we got up and we started working on a new article or contacting a number of people. So just a simple email might make a very big difference. So Ryan, so this week last week we focused on Israeli organizations and journalists who take the stand of justice. This week we're doing it in a different, the same topic but in a different approach. So the Kumi action is shared Palestinian journalism. So what we are doing is that there are we're highlighting and focusing on a number of wonderful news outlets. I don't know if you're aware of some of them or most of them. If there are new names on this list, please check them out. They have credible information and interesting information. One of the best monthly publications is This Week in Palestine. Many of you are familiar. Because of they really relied on tourists and expatriates in their subscription. They have they publish on a monthly basis amazing articles. They have a special discount this year, this period, for people to join their list and have access to all of their archives. They are truly so I would encourage you to check. They're all great, but This Week in Palestine is a wonderful resource. We know the editor and publisher, and I personally read their all of their monthly publications. So that's if it would be nice to look at these art on these places, share, check what new articles they have, share it with a friend, and communicate with them.
Great, thank you. So we are going to move into this time of action. When dissent and truth are repressed, the best response is to shout your dissent even louder and share the truth widely. Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube have cooperated in allowing the Israeli government to monitor and censor online Palestinian content. This censorship has limited the ability of human rights activists and organizations to speak openly and legally under international law. And of course, there is no similar agreement allowing Palestine to monitor and censor Israeli individuals and organizations. As such, we are asking you to pledge to share at least one piece of well-written, eye-opening Palestinian reporting, or one of the articles or reports listed in the additional resource section of this entry on the website each day this week. If you are unsure as to which news organizations routinely produce legitimate journalism from Palestinian journalists, you can start with a list we will post in the chat, and many are the organizations that Omar has already referred to. When you share these articles across your social networks, include a link to this page of the Kumi Now website, along with the hashtags #Kumi Now and #Kumi18. I'm wondering if our guests have want to chime in and give any thoughts about this action we're about to do.
Oh, about the journalism action? Important. It's really great. And I got to meet the editor of This Week in Palestine too. What an amazing person and office. And each of these are certainly well recommended. By all means, bring forward with their writing and carry it into your social network, your connections.
Wonderful. So we're now going to actually give you all 10 minutes before we conclude our webinar. Take 10 minutes to get started on doing this really important advocacy. We will put the Kumi action on the screen and give you time to do your advocacy for the week, or at least get started. Sharing Palestinian journalism, the situation on the ground from Palestinian voices, is so key to combating the imperialism that exists in our world. So we will now take some time to start on our action and come back in about 10 minutes.
Oh, got it. Great.
Thank you, everyone, for taking a few minutes to advocate for Palestine. Please let us know in the chat or through email what you think about doing more of these advocacy times during the session itself. We also have a feedback form on the website at kuminow.com/feedback. Thank you for joining us today. A link to a video of this gathering, along with all the links shared today, will be available on the Kumi Now website and on YouTube in a day or so, and it will be shared in the next newsletter. You can subscribe to Kumi Now on YouTube and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you receive them. We would greatly appreciate it if you shared this amazing session with your friends and colleagues, as well as information about future sessions. Next week, we will take a closer look at U.S. support of Israel and examine where we are in the world, if and how our local tax dollars are being used to support Israel. If you'd like to be reminded of the online gatherings an hour before they begin, you can register for email reminders at kuminow.com/online using the form at the bottom of the page. We hope to see you all back here next week, and thanks again, and have a great afternoon or a great night, whichever your time zone you're in right now. Thanks for joining us.